but we can't really set that up with other people if we don't have it for ourselves. How do you define something for somebody else if you don't have it defined for yourself?
Welcome to the Midweek Motivation Podcast, where we bring practical help for your faith and life. Here's today's episode.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's Midweek Motivation. My name is Jess and I'm one of the pastors here at Westside, and this is my friend Nancy. I always forget the correct credentials.
I'm a psychologist and coach.
That's awesome. Psychologist and coach. Wealth of wisdom. So I'm so
I don't know about that. We'll see.
So excited to have you here to talk about boundaries. We're talking about boundaries as it relates to healthy households. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Pastor Gabe made this amazing comment or noted this amazing concept that boundaries are great for healthy households because they help us to determine where we end and another person begins. And so we're going to dive deeper into that with you today, yeah?
We should, yes. Yeah. Because if we think about boundaries and if we think about so if we're working on boundaries in the home, because we have people living together that are individuals, we have to think about, so if it's where I end and you begin, how do I know what my own boundaries are? So the idea of, obviously, we can have boundaries within relationships. We can have boundaries we should have boundaries, within emotion, within the mental or intellectual, like our thoughts. We have boundaries within the finances of this world and how we handle ourselves. We have boundaries within our spiritual world. We have boundaries with time. We have boundaries with physical self. Okay.
Yeah.
But how do we figure out, first of all, so what does it mean to have boundaries? I mean, Gabe did a great job with it. And if you didn't have a chance to listen to that, you really should. It was one of his best, I think, that and I do that every once in a while. I'll go okay, that was really good. That was really good. And that was a really, really good teaching last Sunday. So please check it out if you haven't heard it. What are boundaries? I mean, boundaries are our way of setting limits with ourselves and with others. And so we oftentimes, so Gabe was talking about a lot about setting limits with others. And I wanted to start first, kind of step back and talk a little bit about boundaries within ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, it would be really difficult, I think, to set boundaries for other people and limitations. Well, they're not really limitations. Gabe talked about this, right? It's like a pathway or conduit for good communication and relationship, but we can't really set that up with other people if we don't have it for ourselves. How do you define something for somebody else if you don't have it defined for yourself?
I think people can, and they certainly can, and I think we've probably all could sit around, a dinner table and talk about Uncle Joe or whatever who can't for the life of himself have any self-discipline, but he will like to tell me how to do my life or how to, or how it should be at home, even if he is chaos. And I mean, sorry if there's any Joes out there. I didn't mean even if you're an uncle. But, it's, if you think about setting, it's understanding yourself enough and well enough to know what are my limits in toleration? What can I tolerate? What can I give? What can I accept in a situation or not accept? I mean, all of those are give or not give, tolerate. What can't I tolerate? What can I give or I can't give? Right. And there's also probably a whole lot of, next layers would be like when can I give? When can I tolerate? When can I, that kind of thing. How can I tolerate? Right. How can I give? How can I accept? But all of that requires a level of understanding of yourself, and thinking about yourself. We all actually know that we have limits.
Sure.
And we know that we have certain things we have certain boundaries. It's just whether or not we're aware of them, because that's when you get dysfunctional stuff that goes on with people, if they hit a boundary, but they don't actually ever think about that's something I can't tolerate.
Right.
And so, that noise, whatever, the stereo's too loud, whatever it could be at home. But what you're really getting at is you're gauging what is my tolerance, or how much until I blow, and knowing our tolerances in those areas that I mentioned before, and we'll talk about those specifically, but in terms of a whole lot of things, can help us to be more harmonious within ourselves, which also then is like the precursor to being more harmonious between each other.
That's good stuff.
So if you don't ever think about, what, it's sort of like the idea of like, what capacity do I have today, or in this moment? I could say today, but really our capacity for varying things probably changes depending on if we're tired, we're hungry, we're overloaded, we're underloaded. I don't know if that's not really a word, but well, it probably is. But
yeah, it is now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because so we talked about like if you don't really know yourself, then you might hit a boundary and just control the situation in order to bring yourself peace. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah.
And instead of knowing, I'm really beat today, I need some peace and quiet. So if this is, when I first get home, could we have 30 minutes when it's not like everybody coming at me, that kind of thing, just so that I can kind of have a transition.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is it's good to know yourself well enough to set up those expectations ahead of time instead of just being blown by the wind. It would
100%.
So that you can not be caught off guard in a certain situation, but
absolutely.
But know yourself well enough to say, hey, I know this about myself, so this is what I'm asking for.
Well, and if you really think about, if we can have, because it talks about, it like, if you look into literature, you look into research that talks about boundaries, we're talking about the ability to not control others, but to maintain a level of self-control.
Right.
Because if we can understand what our own boundaries or limits are, and we can healthily communicate those, then we can come into a family situation, a marital relationship, a roommate situation, friendships, work relationships, in a much healthier way, and kind of do the ask for what we need, or say what we really can't do, but in a way that isn't a defensive reaction.
Yeah.
So and really, so if we talk about like the self-control, and which involves a lot of self-discipline, like just, I think of it like, like let's think about, and I heard this on a different podcast, because I'm a podcast junkie. Okay. So not only do I like to be on them, I love to listen to them. I love information. I am a nerd. There's no doubt about it.
Learning is great.
And I heard this said a while back, and it was so good. It was like, it was about relationships, and it was like, who do you give level 10 access to that demonstrates a level 3 responsibility? So what I mean by that is, whether it's time, it's money, it's relationships, it's like when you think about physical, sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries, do we give the same discernment as to who we give access to those things, our physical self, our sexual self, our emotional self, our mental self, our time, that we would give. What they said in the podcast was like, okay, would you, Jessica, right now, would you give everybody your bank account number?
Right. No.
Right now. Of course not. Because everybody, that access has to match with the level of responsibility the person has in your life, right, that they've shown you, so that you in essence, trust that those are, that they're worthy of that.
Sure.
Okay. And so in some ways, like I like to think about it with people, like how much access to your time, your sexual self, if that's the appropriate relationship we're talking about.
Right.
Your physical can be, drinking, food, space. Who do I allow into my space, my physical space? All that stuff. Who do I hit? My emotion, my mental sphere, my thoughts. Okay. Who do I give access to? And have I ever thought about whether they actually have that level of responsibility, whether that's deserved?
Right.
And the irony of all ironies is you can think of it even like, so if we think about emotional space or in your thought world, like and really I guess it overlaps even to time, because if you come home and you're with a whole bunch of people in home, which of course that's your closest, most dear family,
right?
Or hopefully, that after we've had our day, are you allowing access to somebody who made you mad earlier today? Are you allowing access to your time and your thought space and your energy when you're not with them, but maybe they did something that made you upset, made you feel criticized? If you're ruminating, you're perseverating on it. Like, is your thought time, is your thought process, your thought time, and your time going to them when they don't have that level of responsibility in your life? They don't have, and they shouldn't be here. I'm here with you now. Like, I'm here with you now, wife. But I am thinking about, oh my gosh, that jerky meeting I was in, and you're ruminating about, you're sending texts because you're like talking to, 4 people in the office, or just like, and so I guess a key task, I would say, is to really think about what are we doing in any given moment with our access to us.
Yeah. Like our brain space, our physical presence, are all of the things that you listed off. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So when you think about that process, like how to discern, how to decide, how to think through that process, how would you coach somebody to think through that and identify, what that looks like in a healthy way, how to set boundaries around those types of things?
Well, it's interesting. You think about so when is a boundary necessary? It's almost like you need like a chaos meter. Like you could do it, like if you're feeling chaos in any part of your life, and chaos can be big, blown out chaos. But it could also just be, where do you feel like you're out of control?
Right. Okay.
And the likelihood is, if you're feeling out of control somewhere, you likely need to assess a boundary.
Nice.
Whether it's a boundary within yourself or it's a boundary with somebody else.
Awesome.
Which again is just it should be a healthy limit. It's not a means of controlling something or somebody.
Yeah.
It might be that it affects somebody. Because if you are somebody in a dating relationship and they are taking liberties where they may not be desired, then that may be a more intimate boundary that needs to be set.
Right.
And not, so yes, it's going to affect someone. It's not to control a situation. It might be just to say, hey, this is where my comfort level is. Because it's like the idea of, I know what yes and no mean to me. But if your yes and no is a different thing, then we probably need to get on the same page on that.
have a conversation.
That makes any sense.
It totally does. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, just jumping in right in the middle of this podcast episode to tell you about a resource that you need in your life. You know, if you feel ever stuck in your faith, or if you feel like, I want to grow my faith, but I just don't quite know what the steps are, we got a resource for you called Sticky Faith in a Slippery World. I mean, this world is changing and it's crazy, and we all need something firm to stand on. And I wrote a book for you called Sticky Faith in a Slippery World. You can get your copy right now at the link in the description.
In that scenario, setting boundaries ahead of time, the boundaries that you are aware of already is really necessary, I'd say. Like to think through that stuff ahead of time, specifically, like not specifically, I guess this is across the board, but speaking to like a new dating relationship.
Absolutely.
Like walking into, okay, I'm getting into a space where I'm ready to start dating. What does a dating relationship look like? I should probably be familiar with that on some level, like have some basic ideas. Right. And then as like you meet somebody and you start engaging in that relationship, if something starts to feel chaotic or out of control, then that's a new moment to address a boundary. And
it's funny because, you were saying, how do you know? And I said, when something starts feeling chaotic or out of control, but it could also be on the other end of if it starts feeling just like almost like crickets, so if you think about if you've been married a long, long time.
Right.
And you go, wait a second, something feels off because there's not the same level of connection.
Yeah.
Well, then that may also be another time to go, hey, wait a second, because boundaries don't have to be you can't.
Right.
Boundaries can also be I need.
Yeah.
I want.
Yeah.
And and it's super important that if somebody says, hey, I need or I want, this is what I know about myself.
Yeah.
That it's not something that is said in a manner that is that would elicit a defensive reaction, meaning like, it's not an accusatory thing.
Sure.
It would be and at the same time, if it's said of like, I need, I want, it's not something to have somebody come back and interpret as, oh, so I must be doing something wrong.
Right.
Because it's like your way of communicating what I know within myself.
Yeah.
Something within me is waving the red flag saying, hey, this doesn't feel right.
Right.
And so what can I do to communicate in a healthy way that I either need to set a boundary or I need to just say, it's funny, where do I end? Where do you begin? I don't want somebody to go so far into somebody else that they lose.
Sure.
What would I want?
Yeah.
What would I want in a relationship? What would I want with our time together? What would I want? That kind of thing. Because I think, especially when you are home and you have a spouse and you've been together a while and you have kids, then those things all seem to kind of, responsibilities get in the way. And then you're not really ever taking the time to think about that.
Yeah.
And how rich our lives would be if we would just take a couple of minutes to do almost like Gabe was talking about doing the 10 things you would want in your household, the 10 things you would not want, the 10 things that your spouse would want, not want, or your prospective spouse, and then put those together and create your 10 and 10.
Yeah.
But it also could be you could say, what are the 10 things in terms of time? Time together, time for myself. I mean, how many people I work with a lot of women, and how many women will say like, I have no time for myself. Like there is nothing, none of it.
Yeah.
But maybe there, and so that feeling of lack, can come out and feel like anxious or exhausted or whatever. And maybe a limit needs to be, okay, this needs to be my time because it's my time to fill back up, not my time to be indulgent.
Right.
It may look indulgent if you're going to get a pedicure or you're going, but what you really are doing is just taking some time out to refill.
Yeah. which is important for yourself, but it's also important for the whole of the family in order for you to be your best. Yeah.
And in whatever family that is, it can be whatever community you're in. It could be whatever work environment you're in. If you don't take time to know when I've surpassed my limits, so again, we need to know our limits, and then we need to know when do I need to say something about, hey, I could use this, or I can't do that. So much, especially as we go now towards the holidays. I mean, I know it's not even the end of September, but man, I think we can all realize that we're going to go to, it'll be like Christmas before you know it.
Yeah.
And so it just sort of becomes this fast track in terms of people wanting to do stuff and blah, 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 that we go, wait, I need to carve out time.
Yeah.
Whether it's time for myself, my relationship with my daughter, my relationship with my son, my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my church community, my relationship with anything.
Yeah.
My relationship with myself is huge. I mean, just, we can come into the day, into every day in our relationship so much healthier if we just know what is our capacity and so thinking about, like, I want to make one mention about our mental limits. Okay. So I've said before on this podcast before, we all know that we wake up with so much physical energy every day.
Yeah.
Because we all know when we've tapped it out.
Yep.
Okay. And we either need to take a nap or we need to go to sleep, and we get more by the next day, hopefully, if we've got a good night's sleep. But we also only have so much emotional energy and mental energy every day. And so, with that, knowing where we should put our mental energy. Like I said, are you spending your mental energy on things that have, on hurts, on things that don't have to do with the present or the future? If there's something that is a hurt or is something that you can do something about, do something about it. Clear your mental space.
Right.
If there isn't, and you're ruminating, or if, I hear a lot of people who struggle, and, and they take the struggles into their relationships.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to say, you can say, I'm going to use for an example, somebody could say, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have ADHD, I have any number of mental health. We are so a label society, that I have this, therefore what? Therefore I need X, Y, or Z. But that doesn't mean we get everything we need. We also need to say, like, how is that going to work for you? If we're living in relationship, that how are we giving space and hearing what the other people that we live with can also tolerate, give, and accept.
That's great.
Or not tolerate, not give.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of a conversation that I had with my husband when we were first dating, because I deal with depression, and it's a thing that comes and goes.
Yep.
And so when we were having this conversation about, like, me sharing that with him, I was like, just so that you know, this is something that I deal with. Oftentimes I just need space.
Yep.
I just need to go, like, lay on the couch and watch TV for a little bit or whatever. Over the years, we've gotten into a pattern where he will recognize that this is something that's happening with me. And if it goes too long, he will call me out on it, and it pulls me back out. But he gives me the space to do it first. All of that took communication.
Absolutely.
That happened at the get-go.
100%.
And then as our relationship matured, he started to recognize things where he was like, okay, this is maybe not healthy or maybe destructive. So I'm going to say something in a loving and kind way to let you know that I'm noticing, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
That's that thing, right?
Exactly. And that's
what it looks like.
So in a way, he was noticing where there should be a boundary.
Right.
There was, noticing. And again, boundary, we don't have to get stuck on the word because it feels so, like, hard and fast.
Sure.
We can just think of it. Let's think of it as again, a limit to be healthy, a limit to have the ability to regulate, to have self-control, maintain some level of self-discipline.
Yeah.
So that we're not destroying ourselves or destroying others.
Yeah.
Or our relationships, or saying, not destroying. And that might be a little too. Sometimes it's
sometimes,
not. Yeah, sometimes. But it could also just be where we're not causing undue stress.
Sure. An opportunity for us to live our best lives together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, if we're called to live more Christ-like.
Yeah.
Again, one of my favorite things to say.
Yeah.
Then we are called to love, and and that's a love of ourselves too, so that we're in communion with God. We are understanding what we can give, what we can accept, what we can tolerate, and what we need to communicate about that.
Yeah.
So that we are able to be in a loving relationship with
others.
Others.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So you had made mention of that idea of having a conversation with people about being able to communicate. This is my words, but being able to communicate in a healthy and a loving way that's not harsh. And it kind of builds on last week's podcast that we did with Stacy that talks about trust. Mm-hmm. And I know that trusting relationship really needs to be established before we can start having those conversations. But assuming that you do have that trusting space in your household, how would you coach people to address these conversations?
Well, and I'm going to step back with the assuming.
Sure.
And hopefully I'm not being redundant. I apologize. I haven't had a chance to listen to last week's podcast, but I definitely want to. When we are in a relationship, even if we have a cycle, a dance that we have with that relationship where maybe trust has been marred or we don't feel like we have a strong trust, all that has to happen is that one person changes for the whole trust dance to change.
Right.
And so, and every day we need to start out new, and we do repair. Obviously, there's certain things that may not have the trust be able to be rebuilt, but we can change ourselves in how we're approaching a relationship in order to then have a different conversation.
Right.
So even if because we can't control other people.
Right.
I mean, we would like to think, and some people try,
Yes.
but I also would like to say there's a brick wall if you would like to keep, hitting your head against it, because we can't. We can hopefully communicate well enough, which really just means, and again, I always say, figure out how does your spouse or how does the other person, your roommate, whoever it is you're trying to communicate, how do they receive information best? Do they receive it best talking face to face? Do they receive it best talking in the car where where we don't have to do eye contact? Do they receive it best if we start with a text or an email or whatever it is? And we start by just saying, hey, not like, hey, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Because, of course, that's a little scary.
Of course.
But maybe it's in response to something that already happened. Hey, I was thinking about this. And I had some thoughts. Can we take a few minutes?
Yeah.
I was realizing some things. If you keep it based on what you realize about yourself.
Sure.
It's that whole... Go back to like elementary school with iMessages. If I'm going to say like, I realized this about myself. I get overwhelmed when, or I am not comfortable with, whatever that is. What are your thoughts about that? And you can always say, I recognize my role in this, and here's what I feel like my role was, and where I need to make some change.
Sure.
And and that's easier said than done.
It takes humility for sure to go first.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And you have to make sure that the space is right for you both, whoever it is you're talking to, or if you and your spouse are talking to your kids, you have to just create that space,
right,
so that you can have that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Get to know yourself.
That's good.
Get to know yourself so that you can exercise self-control, but you can also communicate your needs, your wants, your limits, so that you can effectively learn to live intermingling with somebody else.
Right. That makes me think of this verse that I was sharing with you earlier. My phone locked here, just a second. It's in 2 Peter. 2 Peter, 5-7 talks about leaning in because of the promises that God's given to us, like how we should respond to that. And it starts in 5, it says, in view of all of this, make every effort to respond to God's promises. Supplement your faith with a generous provision of moral excellence or goodness, and moral excellence with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control or discipline.
Yep.
And self-control with patient endurance, and patient endurance with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love for everyone. Yeah. And the reason why these couple of verses really stood out to me in relation to this idea of boundaries is that we have to start somewhere. Yeah. And really what this is saying to me is that we're starting out of the promises that God's offered us. And that's the fuel that begins this layered process of growth. And then from there, we start to learn and we understand more, and then we gain more self-control because we have, and more ability to set boundaries because of the knowledge that we've gained. And then that grows and layers on all the way to loving other people.
Absolutely.
But it does start with us. It starts with us. I'd say like the pool that we draw from is the promises of God, what God has done for us.
Right.
And so I think that there's so much value in understanding that that's where that comes from, and that it is a layered process.
100%.
And we have to start with knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of the people around us, knowledge of God's expectations of us, and all of those things. Building up to like endurance and practicing these things and getting stronger and better at them, all the way to sharing, those things with others so that we can love them better.
Absolutely. And, and so then taking that and truly bringing that into every single day.
Right.
In everything we do.
Right.
Again, knowing ourselves, knowing our limits, I'm seeing that as an act not of pride or of self.
Right.
But it's how we can then bring ourselves into relationship with God and others.
Yeah.
And in the most effective way.
Right. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. It's good stuff. Anything else that you wanted to share with us?
I don't think so. We could probably talk about it for a long time.
Probably.
But just recognizing that these are healthy things to be thinking about, and they're not weapons. They're not to control someone else. They're not to excuse our own bad behavior. They are ways of saying, here's my humanity. Where does it meet with yours?
Yeah. That's great. That's a great picture. I love it. Thank you so much for having this conversation, Nancy. I always love talking with you about these things. You're, like I said, a wealth of knowledge, and it's
you're
good stuff.
Silly. Thank you. I enjoy being here. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, make sure that you catch Sunday's message, and we will see you next week.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Midweek Motivation. To make sure you don't miss any content in the future, please subscribe, share, and if you enjoyed this, give us a like. And consider popping by a Westside service some weekend. You can find out more at westsidecommunitychurch.com.